Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. This presentation is part of the AIA Connecticut Continuing Education Program. Our course today, Exploring Construction Manager and General Contractor Delivery Approaches, is presented to us today by Alex Babbidge and Kevin Levesque. We also have Luke Carpenter joining us as well.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Luke Carpenter. I work as the Marketing and Business Development Manager for Babbidge Construction. I am going to just give a quick overview of the agenda, and then we'll get started. So Alex Babbidge will give a quick introduction to our company and review the learning objectives that we'll be covering today. We'll define some key terms that will commonly pop up during the presentation, give an overview of the delivery systems that we're covering, compare and contrast GC and CM contracts, the differences between GC and CM in pre-construction, as well as construction. Then we will explore which delivery method is most appropriate to use depending on a specific situation. And lastly, have a Q&A segment. We'd like this presentation to be as interactive and engaging as possible. So we highly encourage everybody to enter any questions they may have into the chat feature that Jenna referred to. I'll be monitoring those questions as they come in, and we'll do our best to answer everybody's if time allows. Thanks again, and I'll hand it over to Alex.
Great. Thank you, Luke. I'm going to start off with a very brief introduction to Babbidge Construction, and then we'll go through the learning objectives. But in terms of introducing Babbidge, my hope is just to give you the sense that we have some credibility and know what we're talking about. And then over the next half hour or so, you'll be able to determine that for yourself. But we've been in business for 30 years. We focus primarily on what we consider to be small to mid-sized projects in the private, institutional, and commercial markets. So most of our jobs are kind of in the $1 to $15 million range. All of the work that we do is in the private sector. So some of the stuff that we will discuss is from our perspective. So it's kind of on the smaller, mid-sized projects in the private market in Connecticut. So we're not familiar with how the differences really play out on very large jobs or in the public market, because those clearly are different beasts. Learning objectives, Jenna went through them, but we're going to discuss the contractual differences between general contracting and construction management, and then discuss some of the key factors during the design phase, how they differ, during the construction phase, how they differ, and then have a little discussion in terms of how the different approaches are applicable to certain situations. And we really want this to be, when we get to the question and answer, we hope that you'll participate and ask questions, because that's really how we'll be able to address the specific questions that you guys may have. So Kevin's going to try to clarify some of the terms that we'll be using through here that are often ambiguous, so that we can try to get off on the right foot. Kevin?
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so before we jump into our actual learning objectives, I'm going to do my best to try and clarify a few key terms. The terms you see listed here can often be ambiguous. People assign different meanings to them. For today's purposes, we're really looking at them in the contractual sense. So when we say general contractor, we're really referring to contractor who is managing a project that was conceived under a lump sum, competitively bid scenario. Oftentimes people say the word general contractor, and it brings to mind a contractor who does a lot of self-performing, which is often true. But for this case, that really doesn't come into play. It's really just the contractual sense that we're talking about a lump sum, competitively bid project. Construction manager, again, it's an ambiguous term. A lot of people hear that and they think of a contractor who does not perform any work and just subcontracts out all the trades and manages the trades, which again is often the case, but construction managers do and can self-perform. For today's purposes, construction manager is really just referring to the fact that it's a contractor who's managing a project with a GMP or a not to exceed in place with a collaborative, team-oriented approach. At risk. At risk is a term you're going to hear really when we're talking about the CM contracts. And while there are variations, most of the time the CM contractor, the one we're talking about today, is going to be at risk. And really what that means is a GMP has been established. The construction manager has committed to it and is responsible for staying within that GMP amount. And they're at risk if they go beyond it. Stipulated lump sum. These terms are interchangeable. A stipulated sum or a lump sum typically used in the GC contract. And what that is, it's a fixed price. It's just, it's a set number for a defined scope of work, and that's your contract sum in the GC contract. GMP is guaranteed maximum price. NTE, not to exceed. Again, these terms are interchangeable. We see these in the CM contracts. And basically, this is a cap on the construction cost. It's a maximum amount, a maximum cost of the defined scope of the drawings. And that is your contract amount in the CM contracts. Hopefully I did a fair job at defining those terms as we will use them today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex to dive into the learning objectives.
Great. So today we're really going to focus, as we've said, on two contract types, the construction manager at risk and kind of the conventional lump sum GC contract. But before we get in there, I just want to give a very brief overview of the various delivery methods that are available and are used for the construction process. And we've broken it down here the way AIA does. They break it down into 5 different families. And one of them is conventional, which really is the traditional design, bid, build process that has been the standard for years. Construction manager as the constructor, and that's where the construction manager holds all of the trade contracts and essentially acts as the general contractor managing the overall project. And under that, they can be at risk, where they have to provide a guaranteed maximum price, or not, where they're basically just doing it on a time and material basis. There's a construction manager as advisor family, and that's where the construction manager really is a consultant to the owner, providing advice on how the project should come together. But the construction manager does not hold the contracts. The owner holds the trade contractors under the CM advisor format. Design build, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, is where an architect and a contractor will team up and form a single entity that is then responsible for both the design and the construction. And then integrated project delivery is a relatively new delivery process, which we have not actually worked under, so I can't speak to the specifics, but it seems to be used primarily on large projects. And it's a methodology where the owner, the architect, the contractor really have a kind of unified contract, and all parties are responsible for the success of the project and have shared risk and shared rewards. But what we're going to focus on today are the two that are highlighted: the conventional design, bid, build, GC, and the construction manager as constructor. The percentages that you see to the right-hand side indicate, how often the various contracts are used. And unfortunately, this is kind of outdated information. It's from 2012. And I think if we had more updated information, we would see that the percentage of conventional design, bid, build work has gone down, and that the construction manager as constructor has increased over the years. within all of these contract families, there are different contracts, some for large jobs, some for small jobs, maybe some for residential. There are some that are essentially the same contracts, but they have sustainability clauses built into them. But we're really going to focus on the two primary contracts that Kevin is going to outline now.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Alex just mentioned, there are a number of different variations on each of these contracts. We're not going to worry about those today. We're only going to touch on the two main contracts really for each situation, GC or CM. These are the typical contracts. They're the most often used, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. So typical GC contract, most often used is the A101 2017, the standard form of agreement between owner and contractor. And this is where the basis of payment is a stipulated sum. That's a lump sum. One number covers the defined scope of work. Within that stipulated sum, the fee is included in there, all fees and reimbursables. The GC has included all of that in there, but it's known only to the GC. It's a closed book scenario. Owner and architect have no access to see what the fee basis is, profit margins, any of that. It's all closed book for the GC. And he's held to that number for better or for worse. If he's able to keep costs low, oftentimes GC will make great profits on a lump sum contract. If things go the other way and it goes beyond, then it's the GC's responsibility to cover those costs out of their pocket. This contract for GC covers strictly construction. There's no pre-con associated with this. This contract starts at the completion of the construction documents. GC bids the work. Once his proposal is accepted, the GC contract is written. So simply put, it's a defined scope of work, your CDs, an accepted lump sum price provided for that defined scope of work, and a specified time frame to complete that scope of work. So it's simple and straightforward to fill out and finalize this contract. You're basically just putting in owner, contractor information, the cost of the work, and then the completion date. And again, the cost of the work is just that one lump sum number. So that's the GC contract in a nutshell. The typical CM contract, its counterpart in the CM world here is the A133 2019 standard form of agreement between owner and construction manager as constructor. Now, the basis of payment is the cost of the work plus a fee with a guaranteed maximum price. So the guarantee is, again, it's a defined scope of work with the CDs, but the guaranteed maximum price is broken down in great detail, and it's added to this contract as an amendment at the end of the pre-con. So this contract covers from pre-con through construction. Initially, the contract is written, you'll define your pre-con scope, you'll define the cost of the pre-con, what's going to be included in that pre-con, the duration of the pre-con, and your construction manager is going to help you get through the design phase, adding whatever input they can on constructability and other things that Alex will go into more detail on later. But the pre-con's defined, the fee is set for the pre-con, whether it be percentage based or lump sum, and the contract is finalized. You work through pre-con with the construction manager, and a GMP is prepared. When the GMP is agreed upon, it's basically attached to this contract as an amendment, and that includes a schedule. It includes the full GMP breakdown, which is going to have all contractor trade pricing. It's going to have labor hours for the CM, labor rates for the CM. It's going to have the fee included, which is either going to be percentage-based or lump sum. It can be done either way. But it's going to have a lot of detail that really, gives the owner open book look into what the costs are, and essentially make sure that the owner is paying for the actual cost of the work under this contract. Nothing is hidden. It's the owner gets what he pays for, and it's the true cost of the work. I think, in a nutshell, those are the basic contracts. I think we'll elaborate a bit more on what it means during pre-con and construction, and I'll hand it over to Alex to start that with their pre-construction phase.
Okay, so we're going to start with the general contractor version of this, because it's pretty simple. During the pre-construction phase, the general contractor really has no involvement. The architect will fully develop the drawings and the specifications, and then once those are complete, they will be sent out to general contractors to bid on the work. So in one sense, there's no involvement, there's no contractual involvement of the general contractor, but in reality, there is, and that once the construction documents are complete and put out to bid, during the bidding process, contractors and trade contractors will request clarification through RFIs, which is a way to go through the documents, try and identify ambiguities to resolve them or conflicts that may exist. But it's from a contractor's perspective, it's difficult because under the general contracting format, price is really the deciding factor. So as we're putting together pricing, the incentive is to go to trade contractors that are going to give the best price. And that can be great, but it can also cause contractors to solicit prices from subcontractors that may not be the right people for that job, but they're going to have the lowest price. And it also becomes difficult, and during the bid process, one of the reasons that we spend a lot of time submitting RFIs and trying to get clarification things is we're trying to make sure that the playing field is level. Technically, the contractor who submits a bid is bidding on the plans and specifications, and if they're incomplete or there are ambiguities in there are a lot of contractors that will use that to their advantage to find extras and to make up money that they may not have accounted for in their bid. So we try to remove as many of those ambiguities as we can so that everybody's bidding on the same scope, and that what we would consider an unscrupulous contractor doesn't have opportunities that they can exploit during construction. It's also, from a contractor's perspective, a bit like gambling. Despite our best efforts to try and get all of the subcontractor bids in a day or two before the bid is due, that doesn't happen. Yeah, we may get some, but most of the bids come in the morning of the morning that the bid is due. And electrical contractors and electrical suppliers in particular are notorious for not submitting pricing until late in the bid process, which means as the general contractor, we're having to try and analyze and scope bids in a very short period of time, which can be difficult to do. And if you're competitively bidding and you get a number that's 30% lower than all the others, you know, what are your choices? You can ignore that and go with the price that you know is a complete number. But by doing that, you're basically throwing all of the work that you've done out the window, because you know somebody's going to carry that lower number and they're going to get the job, and all of your work is for naught. So there's, you know, from our perspective, a lot of risk associated with the bidding process for general contracting. So that's kind of the level of pre-construction involvement, which really isn't technically pre-construction contractually, but it does happen on the design, bid, build jobs. And on the construction manager side, really one of the reasons that construction management developed as a delivery method was because people were unhappy with the results that they were getting with the design, bid, build. And you know, the conflict that could occur contractors taking advantage and making up money on frivolous or excessively pricing extra work items. So the whole concept between the construction manager is to bring the contractor into the mix early on and work with the owner and the architect to really try and put together the best project that they can. And collaboration is really the key to the whole thing. It's working together as a team, trying to find the best solutions. It's all done on an open book basis, so everybody sees what's going on and can raise concerns or make suggestions, and it's really a nice way to work. But one of the things that the construction manager does during the pre-construction period is budgeting, which is obviously very important. Help to make sure that the project is on track. It can start with conceptual budgeting and then be done at the various design phases. The budgeting is important, obviously, to the project, but it also, involving a CM, you're going out to trade contractors. So they're using their experience, but they're also communicating with the trade contractors that are actively involved with the work, know what's happening with prices, know what's happening with material deliveries, and all of that information can be brought in to help the team make the best decisions to ensure that the project is being developed in line with the budget. It also creates accountability. If a construction manager puts together a schematic design phase estimate and then in the DDs the price has gone up substantially, he's got some explaining to do. And that's appropriate and right, but it makes sure that the CM is really staying on track. Constructability is a very important factor. By bringing a contractor on board early, they can provide their input in terms of how best the project to go together, if there are different materials that may be better selected. On renovation projects in particular, you can do exploratory demolition, which allows you to get in and open things up and find problem areas and come up with a solution during the design phase so that when you get into construction, everything goes smoothly and you're not having to deal with additional costs that come up as a surprise and delay the project and all of that stuff. So scheduling and phasing is an important aspect in terms of identifying long lead items, how the project should be phased. We do a lot of projects that are interior renovations that have to be done in phases, and how do you coordinate that? How do you set it up so that the work can be completed with minimal disruption to the owner and safely, and all of that stuff is very important. It can be worked out. Construction management also has the advantage of allowing the project to be expedited. Under the design bid build, the project gets designed, it gets bid, and then once the contractor is on board, the construction process starts. By involving the contractor earlier in the process, you have the option to, or you will identify what are the long lead items, and you have the option of either purchasing materials early. So if they're air handling units with a really long lead time, you can order those before the project is complete and have those in fabrication so that you have them when you need them. You can release an early package for demolition or something like that, so you can get the building or the space cleared out before the drawings are complete and everything else is lined up. I had mentioned on the general contractor side the gambling aspect, and that you're going to trades that may be the least expensive but not necessarily the best for the job. But when a construction manager is on board, they will put together a list, often in conjunction with the architect and the owner, to identify and solicit bids from the trade contractors that are most appropriate for the project. And as you all know, there's a wide spectrum of quality and specialization within the trades, and getting the right people for the job is vitally important. The owner still gets the advantage of competitive bidding among the trades, but it's competitive bidding among qualified contractors that are appropriate for the work. And the involvement of a CM during pre-construction also allows them to put together trade packages, and that is going through all of the documents and identifying which trade is responsible for which items of work. And that prevents duplication of pricing on items. It prevents gaps in the pricing. And by clearly defining it, allows the contractors, the trade contractors, to really tighten up their number because it's clear what they're responsible for. They're not putting money in for things that they may not be ultimately responsible for. It also allows the construction manager to clearly communicate the requirements of the job. If there are specific logistical issues that have to be communicated, the trades will be aware of that. If portions of the work have to be done off hours, if the client has any really specific terms or concerns in terms of how the work's executed, that can be communicated. So all of that is incorporated into their pricing, and people know what the expectations are. And then during the development of the guaranteed maximum price, it's, again, all open book, so the numbers can be reviewed. The owners and architects can be involved to the extent they want in terms of reviewing all of the bids, making suggestions in terms of which trade contractor should be awarded the work. And all of this stuff can be reviewed and vetted before the guaranteed maximum price is put together, so that you're not in a situation where you're having to pick a sub based on the lowest price, with 1 minute before the bid goes in. So it's a much more controlled process, and I know for this AIA presentation we're supposed to be impartial, but I probably already tipped my hand that we think often the construction manager is a better approach. And there are certainly situations that we'll discuss where a straight lump sum GC makes sense, but I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to turn it over to Kevin for the construction phase.
Hey, Alex. We have a couple questions that I think would be good for you to answer on this slide. So the first one is from Bruce. His question is, what is the breakdown of percentage of Babbidge's projects as GC or as a CM?
We probably do 80% of our work under construction management as opposed to GC. And that's our preference, again, because I think we can really add value by getting involved early in the project. But we're certainly not opposed to competitively bidding as long as we're bidding against other qualified general contractors.
And one more from Alex Esposito. Typically, what is the fee for CM versus GC on a percentage of construction basis?
It varies. It varies. It's the best answer, I think. But on the construction management side, construction management fees are generally expressed as a percentage of the overall cost. When we look at it, we're looking at a number of factors. It's what's the market, what's the competition, and what's the duration of the work, and what's our commitment going to be to the project in terms of our labor. So if we have a superintendent and a project manager dedicated to a project that lasts a year, those resources are going to be tied up on that project for that period of time, and as a consequence, they have to generate a certain amount of revenue to help feed the beast and allow us to be profitable. So, if it's a long job with a relatively low cost, our fee on a percentage basis would be higher than if you had the same amount of work that could be done in half the time, because our cost would be less. So our return on our investment would be the same, but it would be our cost would be smaller. So on a percentage basis, we'd be happier with a smaller number. But they typically range on the larger jobs that we do. We're typically in the 2 2.75% to 3%, and then on smaller ones we're in the 5 to 7.5% range. and bidding as a general contractor, we don't tell people what it is. But again, we look at it kind of in terms of how much money do we need to make on that project, largely as a reflection of how much of our resources we have to put into it. But there are also ways that you can then make more money on the lump sum job. So on the construction management, you get your fee, that's what you're getting for it, and then your incentive is to save the owner as much money as you can. Kevin, I think, will talk about shared savings that happens, or excuse me, not shared savings, all savings going back to the owner. But there are contractors that will competitively bid a job at less than their cost. And then they will go out and they'll beat up their subcontractors, they'll shop them to make money, and then they'll go in and if they've, during the bidding process, identified problem areas, they can then use those to their advantage to build up the profit. Our profitability is typically higher on our GC jobs than it is on CM jobs. But again, there's kind of a risk and reward dynamic that takes place there. So I hope that answers your question, Alex.
I see that there are a few more questions, but for the sake of continuing the presentation, we'll address those at the end. But okay. Thank you for your contribution, and keep them coming. On to Kevin.
And Luke, I think during this slide, I'll address Matthew's question here naturally as I go through this on the cost to the owner. So we'll knock that one out here. So GC versus CM during construction. We'll start with general contractor here. Typically, and we're talking in general, in typical terms, obviously there's exceptions to every rule, but this is basically the standard. This is what you're going to see the majority of the time under these standard contracts. General contractor is going to build what's shown on the drawings, and that's what he owns by contract, meaning his lump sum contract amount doesn't include allowances, it doesn't include a contingency. So any holes in scopes, any discrepancies between drawings, site conditions, existing conditions, and unknowns that are discovered along the way falls back on the owner as a change order for costs. The general contractor has not included any of that in his number. So he doesn't share responsibility for any of these items. And what that does is it often leads to, during construction, if there are issues, there's typically more RFIs and more change orders. And the flip side of this is really where you see the savings for the owner. So if a CM has done a good job during pre-construction and done his job properly, you're going to see the return on that during construction with change orders, RFIs, lost time, delays greatly diminished to the point where the cost of the pre-con has now paid for itself and then some, and that's how you save money for the owner with a good pre-con and continuing it through construction. But back to the general contractor, it's the flip side of that. The costs start mounting after initial construction because you have the RFIs and the change orders as you progress through construction in certain circumstances. The other aspect of the general contractor scenario is it's closed books. So the owner and architect, they basically see one number, his lump sum number. He'll break down a schedule of values, typically a little bit on G703 for billing, but it's not broken down in detail. It's billed just on a percentage complete. So there's really no insight for the architect or for the owner on what the actual cost of the work is. There can be huge profit margins, there can be slim ones, but really the only person that knows that is the general contractor. It's all completely closed book. So all of this, in most cases, leads to increased risk. But increased risk for who? So really, it starts with increased risk for the contractor. As Alex has touched on, a few different situations where the contractor is taking risk during the bid. He's taking risk during construction because he's making assumptions. He's dealing with a lot of unknowns. He's carrying maybe a lowball subcontractor that he had to carry to get the job to just keep the playing field level, but didn't have enough time to really level the bid. So there's always protection and padding that needs to be put in for these risks. Some subs, maybe there's not time to fully vet them. So the risks that this contractor is now taking on, they equate to risks for the overall success of the project, because now you're potentially dealing with contractors who aren't right for the project, who lowballed their way into it and either aren't qualified or just didn't properly price the job. And if a major contractor does that and they fall down on the job, it becomes a domino effect and really can be catastrophic for the overall project. So it's definitely an increased risk scenario under the GC format. Construction manager. During construction, you come in with the GMP. I'll kind of touch on this other question here from Philip. Yeah, the GMP is prepared at the end of CDs. It's the counterpart to the GC bid model. It's your contractual price, but it's detailed with line by line breakdowns of what the actual costs are, what the fees are. So you're seeing the real true cost of the work, and the owners are only paying for the true cost of the work. Anything beyond that goes back to the owner at the end of the project. But you come into construction after going through pre-con, you have your GMP, the architect and construction manager have worked side by side to flush out any discrepancies on the drawings, any potential constructability issues, any items that they can't fully vet out and detail out and put a hard number on during that time. Typically the team will come up with allowances that are agreed upon. So at least there's money carried in the budget to deal with certain unknowns, or maybe something isn't fully designed yet. You can carry an allowance to deal with that, so that you don't have to go back to the owner for change orders. And those allowances are managed. They're open book. They're reviewed and approved by the owner and the architect before they're used. But it just gives you basically a pool of money to deal with a defined situation, to keep the project running efficiently and to keep costs down and minimize change orders to the client. GMP also has a contingency in it. So the contractor carries a contingency, which is typically about 5% of the cost of the work. And that, again, allows the job to keep running smoothly, dealing with unknown conditions, discrepancies on the drawings. The contractor can use the contingency. You don't have to go back to the owner for change orders, increasing their costs and slowing things down. And at the end of the day, any of it that's not used, allowances, contingency, and any other line item reverts back to the owner at the end of the project. So it's open book. You have budget tracking and reporting. So typically weekly, sometimes monthly. The actual timeline for that is determined within the contract, but the CM provides budget updates to the owner and architect. Typically they're reviewed at the weekly job meetings. Sometimes they're provided once a month, but they give a line-by-line tracking of how we're tracking on the budget with projections on where we're going to land at the end of the project. And obviously, as you progress through the project, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. But what that does is it gives the owner a chance to make better decisions for their project. Maybe there's an item that they wanted to add but didn't think it fit to the budget, and we're tracking on the budget to provide a savings at the end of the project. So now maybe the owner can make the decision to add that item that they weren't sure could fit into the budget. So having that transparency, seeing where your budget's tracking as you progress through the project, allows really the design team and the owner to make better decisions for the project. Substantiated requisitions, rather than just sending a bill on percentage complete with no backup, everything's substantiated. Labor hours are accounted for, labor rates are provided with backup and rate sheets for them. Material invoices are provided for all materials and equipment, and contractor invoices are provided that provide, again, all the same backup for their invoices. So it's a true cost of the work plus the fee. So there's no unknowns. It's just fully open book, and the owner knows they're paying for the work that was actually completed. I mentioned the allowances and the contingencies, and that's kind of similar to the shared responsibility for the gaps. The CM has worked through the pre-con with the architect, with the owner, and they're partly responsible for anything that was missed during that period. Partly the contingency and allowances cover that, but the CM has some ownership in providing a thorough, complete, and proper project. They're not just doing what was drawn. So all of this kind of combines to reduce risk. And going back to the question that was asked, this reduced risk and thorough pre-con minimizes RFIs. We often see when we do a CM job and we've done a pre-con on it, we're sending a lot less RFIs, there are a lot less change orders, and that's really where we see the value come in and the reduced risk for the client. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alex to tell us which scenario.
Okay, if we can, Kevin, before we move off this slide, you may have mentioned it and I spaced out, but I just want to make sure we touch base on what happens when we save money, when a construction manager saves money, so that with the guaranteed maximum price, the owner is given a ceiling that the project won't exceed. If it does, the construction manager is at risk and then has to cover those additional costs. The contracts have a clause where you have to fill in to say what happens with the shared savings. And we always have that the savings revert to the owner 100%. So if we're able to save $100,000 on a project, and that could either be unused contingency, or it could be some money in a buyout, or it could be we find a more efficient way to do something, we get the job done faster, whatever it is, that money goes back to the owner 100%. And then we get our fee. We get our cost reimbursed and we get a fee. There are times where contractors, and I think it's done with some regularity, there will be a shared savings clause. So if we saved $100,000, maybe the owner gets 75 of that and the construction manager gets 25%. And we stay away from that. We think it just kind of leads to gamesmanship, where you kind of jack up the guaranteed maximum price so that you know that you'll have savings that you share. But by saving money during the cost of construction, all of that reverts to the owner, which is obviously a great benefit for them. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, we'll try to kind of touch base on when is it right to, or when is it best to use the different contract forms. And I think we feel that the conventional design bid build works best on projects that are very well defined. Generally, projects that don't have too much hair on them, right? That are pretty straightforward. The drawings have been developed fully. The items that are wanted are specified, and there are no real complexity issues from the owner's perspective. They have a set of documents that show what they want. They want it built, and they want to try to get the best price for it. And in that scenario, I think it probably does result in the best price. But you have to be careful that you're going to the right general contractors to do it, that you're not going to the shady guys. And also that the documents are in fact complete and it's a relatively straightforward job. And then you get the best cost. But there are potentially a lot of other costs, not just the construction costs, that can come into play. If the contractor has carried a low number from a major trade that falls down on the job, even though the contractor is responsible, what are the implications to the project as a whole in terms of delays or infighting? There are reputational costs of the client. If you're doing work for an institutional client on their site, and the job sits dormant for a long time, or an end user is not able to occupy the space when they want to, or if the job looks like a mess, all of those things are a reflection on the client. And even though the contractor's on the hook for them, it's damaging the owner's reputation. So I think the more complex a project is, and the higher the stakes for the owner, the more construction management really makes sense. I think getting the value that's provided by getting a contractor on board early in terms of their input really sets the basis for a project to go well going forward. And if they're doing their job, they're actually saving the owner more money than it costs for them to do it. And as they save money, that money goes to the owner. So we really think that CM on complex jobs where the owner has high stakes, construction management is the best approach to use. There also, even though, one thing I want to discuss, and since this is a kind of an AIA industry thing, I want to put on the table, is that there's also a lot of industry cost that's incurred in the GC bidding process. And it's a cost that has to be recouped somewhere. So you might not be getting an invoice from a contractor for something, but it's got to be built in their price. If you think about it, if you're taking a moderate-sized job that's being put out to bid, if you go to 5 contractors to bid it, most of the jobs that we bid, we probably spend somewhere around $5,000 of our time putting it together. If there are 20 trades and we're going out to 5 subcontractors in each trade, that's 100 subs that are spending time on it. If they were to spend, even if you said $200 or $250 preparing each of their bids, that's adding a huge number to the cost of the project. So, between us and our subcontractors, let's say we're spending $30,000 putting together the bid. There are 4 other contractors who are doing the same thing. So potentially, $150,000 is being spent to assemble those bids. Even if we say that there's overlap in the subs, or my math is way off, let's say it's $100,000 each. That's a cost that all of the general contractors and all of the trade contractors are going to have to recoup somewhere. So it ultimately gets built in their pricing, and it's ultimately paid for by the client. When you have a construction manager on board, you're still going through it. There's still costs being incurred, but you have one contractor who's going out to, let's say, the 5 subs. So theoretically, it's 1/5 the cost of the industry. So it's just a much more controlled, I think, a much more intelligent approach. And again, I know we're supposed to be neutral here, but it's hard for me to be. Anyway, I think we'd like to open it up to questions, and I hope, I know there are a couple that we still need to address, but we'd love to hear your thoughts and see how we can address them. So thank you for letting us do this.
We have 2 from Phil Bernstein. Some of these may have been touched on a little bit, but they're interesting questions. So here we go. The first one is, these observations about the respective risks and returns are interesting and probably consistent with the anecdotal experience. But do you guys have data to back up these assertions about the advantages of CM? Not that I'm defending design, bid, build, but are there statistics here?
I'll take that. And hi, Phil. I wish we did, Phil. We should. The information is there. We have not mastered the big data side of the business at this point. I'm sure there are numbers out there, but we do not have them. We can look at our overall profitability, and I know that we are historically more profitable on the lump sum jobs than we are on our CM projects. But again, there's less risk, and a bird in hand is worth two in the bush, and that's reflected in the pricing and the ultimate cost of the project. So that's something that we will work on. Thank you for giving us a prod.
And one more from Philip. Please explain the business model of CM at risk. All the upside, quote unquote, savings goes to the owner. All the downside, GMP bust in theory, is taken by the CM. What is the advantage of this model? Is the fee so profitable that it works as a business proposition?
I'll be happy to take that one again. So, as I tried to mention when I summarized, I think the CM at risk works really well as a risk control measure, right? So I'm not terribly, I don't go to the casino. It's like, I get enough risk just in the day-to-day activity of our business. But by reducing the risk, and not having to spend all of that money chasing projects that we're not going to get, we can be profitable with lower margins. But I think really the key is, every business has to decide how they want to operate, and the construction management approach is really what we want to do. It's more in line with our values and what we find rewarding at the end of the day is, it really allows us to do a good job. But we have to be profitable to stay in business. But really, we get satisfaction and enjoyment out of doing a good job, having a happy client, hopefully doing repeat work for them. And the construction management model is just much better suited for that than it is the conventional design bid build. And I think if we were looking at it from a purely profit perspective, and it depends on your approach. There are people that do very well in the competitive bid market, but it's really kind of playing a game that we don't want to play. So I think I think we're happy to have lower margins in some contractors, but we're happy where we are, and you can be profitable as a CM. I mean, there are certainly some big firms that seem to be making a lot of money. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's probably the best I can do. Do we have any other questions, Luke?
No, that appears to be it for questions. As you see on the slide, if anybody has any additional things they'd like to reach out to us about, you have all of our phone numbers and email addresses there. You can find us at babbidge.com. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm not sure if Alex and Kevin have anything else to add.
I don't, but I do. I just want to reiterate that if you have questions, please feel free to follow up with any of us. We'd love to discuss them and cover any items that we may have missed during this presentation. Thank you.